A very good evening to all of you. First and foremost, if my voice is clear, if the video is clear, please let me know if everything is fine. All clear? Wonderful. Right. So I see that a lot of you are still joining the session. So let me just take one more minute before we begin. All right. So let's begin with the session. Welcome to all of you. Today we are going to discuss the webinar on environment and ecology, and this is for the last 1 month of all the important news that we have seen in the newspapers and everywhere else. And when we look at the list of topics, I know when you look at the list of topics this month is longer than usual. And that's also because I did find a lot of important articles that I thought that cannot be missed. And that's why I have included everything that I found. And all these articles, they have been taken from various different sources. I've taken some from the Hindu newspaper, some from the Indian Express newspaper, some from some of the other news portals as well. Some have been taken from Down to Earth magazine and its website, and some of the other environmental portals which are very crucial in their reporting. So that's why we have taken a bunch of topics from all these different news channels. And now, looking at the topics, let me first explain you what are the topics. So if you look at all these topics that we have right in front of you, the first 5 or 6 topics, they are the topics where we need a longer discussion, where we need to understand various aspects of everything that we have to discuss here. And then after that, towards the end, the next list of topics that you have, starting from point number 7, going until point number 13, these are topics which are not very big topics. These are just one liners or two liners. But when you look at the past few papers of environment and ecology, especially given your prelims examination, you'll find that there are a lot of questions that they have been asking which are specifically based on species, that they would just pick one species that has been in the news for one reason or another, and they ask you a question based on that. So that's why these, although these are going to be very small topics, hardly 2 lines of explanation for me, but these are areas from where prelims based questions can be asked very easily. And the first few topics that we have, these are the topics from where both prelims as well as mains based questions can be framed. So that's why we'll have a discussion on all these different topics. So let's begin and look at all these different areas that we have in store for you. The first topic is about coral warnings revised. Now, what exactly is this topic? Now, what we know is that there is something called as Coral Reef Watch. And this Coral Reef Watch is a program that is operated by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, that is based out of US. And specifically as a part of their program, they try to monitor and assess and predict all the things related to the coral reefs, the health of the coral reefs across the world. And they have certain parameters based on which they do the analysis of what the health of coral reefs is like. So now what they have done is that they have various warning levels with regards to what's happening to all the corals all across the world. And this is where they have added new warning levels. So until now, so let me first begin with what exactly has happened. So until now, they used to have all these levels as you see on this side, that the levels were either no stress, bleaching watch, bleaching warning, bleaching alert level 1, and alert level 2. These were the warning levels that they had until now. But then they have added new warning levels, as you can see on the other side of the screen: bleaching alert level 3, 4, and 5. Now, first let's start with what exactly is this Coral Reef Watch. What exactly is Coral Reef Watch? What exactly do they do? And how exactly there they have a very, very important aspect when it comes to understanding of the coral reefs and what's happening to all these coral reefs. So when it comes to them, when it comes to the Coral Reef Watch, when it comes to the Coral Reef Watch, just understand their role first, that what exactly they do. Now they are a part of, just understand this, that they are a part of National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. All right, they are operated by National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and they basically play a very very important role in monitoring, in assessing, and in predicting the health of coral reefs. All right, so their role is in monitoring, assessing, and at the same time they will also look at the understanding of the health, or predict, you can say, they can predict the health of coral reefs. So this is exactly what they do. Now, as a part of this program, there are multiple functions that they have. There are multiple roles that they play. So, for example, the first role is in terms of the monitoring of the coral health. So, what they would do is that they would utilize the satellite data, and they would be able to provide the real-time analysis of the sea surface temperatures, and at the same time, all the environmental conditions that would affect the coral reef's health. So that's why they would track all these conditions, and the program will be able to identify the areas where coral reefs are at a risk of stress or something which can destroy them in one way or the other. For example, thermal stress, when the temperature increases, this is something that can lead to something called as coral bleaching. And we'll discuss what is coral bleaching little later, but they would do that. So that's why the first role that they play here is in monitoring, monitoring the health of corals. All right, and this would be based on, let's say, satellite data, and they would do the analysis of the sea surface temperatures and all the other environmental factors. So based on these aspects, they will try to monitor the health of the corals. So that is first thing that they do. At the same time, they would also give you bleaching alerts with regards to what is happening. So for example, they have there is a tool that they have, and the tool basically is nothing but an early warning system, coral bleaching early warning system. And with the help of this system, they are able to generate the alerts for the regions where the sea temperatures are reaching the levels that could lead to coral bleaching. So any part of the world, wherever they see that there is a rise in temperature more than normal, then in that case they would start giving bleaching alerts. So that's why they would have a very very important role to play in this regard also, that they would give you bleaching alerts. They would give you bleaching alerts, and this will be purely based on the surface temperature monitoring that they have done with the help of their satellites. And that's why wherever there is a potential coral bleaching, they would give you information based on their reports. Then after that, what they also do is they do a prediction of what could happen. So for example, based on the data that they have, the past and the present data that they have, they would make models based on what's happening at various parts of the world, and wherever it can lead to certain bleaching events, so they would also give you a warning in advance with regards to what could happen. Then at the same time, they also help in a lot of research and development. We see that there are in case of particular understanding of what could happen due to climate change, due to ocean acidification, and all the other environmental factors that can lead to potential problems in the coral health. So they would give you warnings based on all these aspects as well. And then at the same time, there are other rules that they also play. For example, with regards to all the data that you have and all the various aspects of every research that they have done, they would also help you in giving in making you giving you better understanding of what's happening in the world, and also help in increasing the awareness with regards to coral reefs, the importance of coral reefs, and what potentially is causing the damage to the coral reefs. So that's why they would do all these things, and they would help in the conservation and the management of the coral reefs altogether. So this is exactly what this coral reef watch program, this reef watch program will be doing. So now what they have done is, as we discussed, that they, for the first time, they have added three new levels. All right, three new levels have been added, and this has been done just 2 months back in the month of December. This has been done, and this article right here that we have, this was published in the Down to Earth magazine of this month. So this is where they have talked about what exactly is this warning about. So there are three new levels that they have added. So until now, the levels stopped at this, that is bleaching alert level 2, and now there are three more levels. And the first level, for example, is where they are talking about a risk of death of multiple species within the reef zone, and then the risk of severe multi-species mortality, and then lastly severity number 5, alert number 5, is basically about the risk of near complete mortality of the coral ecosystem, with over 80% of all the coral reefs being lost in this particular region. Now when it comes to these alert levels basically are done on the basis of the various factors, and one important factor here in this particular scenario is degree heating week. This DHW that you see here, DHW, this basically stands for degree, all right? So DHW, so this basically stands for degree heating week. So when it comes to degree heating week, this is on the basis of the degree heating week, meaning that how much change in temperature has happened over a week. So that's why degree heating week is what they are using. So for example, when it comes to the temperature changes, or let's say temperature increase over a week, how much temperature increase has happened over a week is what will be called as DHW. So now in this particular scenario, what we have seen is that they have been adding various different categories. For example, 4 DHW, meaning 4 degree heating week, means that the temperatures are 4 degrees higher than the usual maximum temperature over 7 days consecutively. So for example, let's say there is any region across the world wherever we have seen more than 4 degrees Celsius increase in normal temperatures or average temperature over a week, then in that case we'll say that it is more than 4 DHW. So this is exactly how they are calculating the things. All right, DHW means, so let me just write it here for clarity, that degree heating week basically stands for change in temperature over a week. All right, change in temperature over a week, meaning 7 days of time. So now what happens is that until now it's used to end here, but why it used to end here is that the maximum level that they used to have was up to 8 DHW. But in 2023, when the measurement was done for some of the areas across the world, the temperature or the DHW was up to 20. So not just imagine this, that the normal levels are supposed to be not more than 8, and they have never done calculations beyond 8. But now in 2023, when they did the calculations showed a level up to 20, that is 20 DHW, meaning 20 degrees Celsius more than the normal temperatures over 7 days of time. So this is where they decided that they'll have to add more levels, and hence they added more levels here, and that's why level 3, 4, and 5 were hence added with regards to the understanding of how much coral bleaching is happening. Now, in with regards to when it comes to the coral bleaching, this and all may not be that important for you. It's just for reference that you should know that okay, fine, this is what they have done. what you need to understand is what do we mean by coral bleaching. Now, if you look at this particular figure, this gives you an idea about what happens in case of coral bleaching. That in case of healthy corals, you have the corals and the algae which depend on each other to survive, and they are in a symbiotic relationship. They are in a symbiotic relationship. Now, when the stresses happen, now stresses meaning, let's say, temperature increasing. So when the stresses happen, this is when we see that the algae will be coming out of, as you can see that in the first picture, if you notice, all the algae are within the coral systems. Whereas in this case, the algae have started coming out of the coral system. And when the bleaching happens, as you can see in the case of the bleaching, all the algae they have left the corals. Now understand what corals are and the symbiotic relation. What is this symbiotic relation and what do we mean by corals? You might know, some of you might know, some of you may not know. So let me just tell you about this. Now when it comes to corals, you might know that corals basically belong to the animal kingdom. So corals can be called as animals. But when it comes to corals and how they get their nutrition or how they get their energy, they get their energy from photosynthesis. Now this is very unique, that how do you, I mean, an animal getting their energy from photosynthesis, how does it that happen? Now understand this. When it comes to corals, corals are formed by multiple small and soft organisms which are known as polyps. Right, these are known as polyps. So they are made of polyps. So these polyps basically are small soft organisms, small animals you can say, called as polyps. Now these polyps, they would secrete a rock, chalk like rock. All right, chalk, you might have seen that it has white color because of calcium carbonate. So they would basically secrete calcium carbonate, and this calcium carbonate will make up the exoskeleton of this polyp. All right, so all these polyps, they have an exoskeleton. They have an exoskeleton made of calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate. Now calcium carbonate is just like your chalk, the chalk that is used on the blackboards. So that's why it has that white color, correct? So now these polyps, they have whitish color, that's why they have a whitish exoskeleton. Now what we see is that over many years, over, you can say, hundreds of years, this process produces a very complex structure, and that is something that can measure, that can go multiple layers, or they can be of multiple meters in length. Now what happens is that for the energy that they need, the energy that they get for their survival is actually from photosynthesis. And this photosynthesis is obviously, these are animals, so they cannot do photosynthesis. So this photosynthesis are done by a certain algae which are known as zooxanthellae. So these zooxanthellae, they are the ones. So for energy, for energy, they survive on photosynthesis, and this photosynthesis is done by zooxanthellae. And this zooxanthellae is nothing but a kind of, zooxanthellae are a kind of algae. All right, these zooxanthellae, they are a kind of algae. Now this is very unique, because now what happens is that these zooxanthellae, they live within the coral's protective exoskeleton. They live within the, what you see here. So these zooxanthellae or the algae, they live within the exoskeleton of these corals. Now what happens is that these corals basically, they would protect the algae. The algae will be protected from all the marine species that can feed upon them, and in return for from this protection from grazing marine species, the algae will share the products of their photosynthesis with the corals, and hence the energy will be provided by the algae. So it's like protection money. I mean, you might have seen in movies protection money, or hafta or rangdari, in those movies where somebody will say that, a gunda will say that I'm going to protect you, just that you'll have to pay me. So here also something similar happens, that the corals do the same with the algae, that they would protect the algae from all the marine species, and in return the algae will do photosynthesis and provide energy to all these corals. So that's why they are said to be in a symbiotic relationship. This is the exactly the symbiotic relationship that we have in this particular scenario. Now, when it comes to this, when it comes to any kind of stress, this stress can cause something called as coral bleaching. Now understand, what do we mean by coral bleaching? Coral bleaching basically is a phenomena that occurs when the corals, they start losing out their colors. If you have seen the pictures of corals, you might have seen that they are very vibrant in colors, they have various beautiful colors, and these all beautiful colors that they have, it actually happens because all these colors are because of the algae. All right, so algae provide them the vibrant colors. The vibrant colors that these corals have, they are provided by the algae. Now what happens is that whenever these corals are stressed, meaning that, let's say, when uh, the situation or the condition is not favorable, then in that case what we see is that these corals, they will start losing the algae. All right, they will start losing the algae. Now as they start losing the algae, this is where this is called as coral bleaching. So when, just understand this, that when the water temperature will start to become warm, we have been talking about this, that global warming is leading to the rise in temperature of the oceans. So whenever the sea temperature will rise, whenever the water temperature becomes too warm, the corals, they become stressed, and they start expelling all the algae, all the zooxanthellae, they are expelled by the corals, and this leads to a loss of algae that was giving them the colors. Now it doesn't mean that the corals will die, it doesn't immediately kill the corals, but at the same time, the corals will be severely weakened. All right, they'll be severely weakened, and without their main source for nutrition, they will start becoming very susceptible to diseases as well. Now, although the corals can survive the bleaching event, they may not be able to grow and reproduce well. And that's why it will negatively impact their reproduction, it will negatively impact their development and growth. And this is something which is called as bleaching. So that's why this bleaching ultimately can lead to the death of the corals. So as soon as, that's why as soon as the bleaching starts, this is where we have to start taking all the precautions. And when it comes to the corals, corals are very sensitive, and that's why they are also indicators of the health of the marine ecosystem. Because as soon as the temperature starts to rise, this is when they start losing control, and they will start expelling all the algae. And thus, now that there is no algae, there is no photosynthesis, there is no energy, so they start to become very weak, and over a period of time they might die. They do not immediately die. All right, they do not immediately die, they become very weak, but they might also start to die eventually. So when it comes to coral bleaching, what we have seen is that the coral bleaching can be a direct impact of global warming, and there are other stress factors as well, such as overfishing or destructive, let's say, practices in terms of pollution. Marine pollution is a big problem. So we see that there are all these stresses also apart from climate change that can also lead to the problems with the coral reefs. And that is where we see that there have been significant events of coral bleaching across the world, and that's why these coral reefs are threatened. Now when it comes to these coral reefs, so that's why this is something which is called as coral bleaching, where we are talking about the phenomena when corals, they lose their vibrant colors and they turn white, something like this. If you see this, this is where you see that all these corals have become white. Generally what you would see is that they would show various different colors, vibrant colors, but this particular phenomena, when you see that they all become white in color. Why white? Because now they are just left with their exoskeleton, and all the algae are gone. And algae were giving them all the colors, but now that the algae are gone, they are left with only that white chalkish kind of color. So this is what happens in case of coral bleaching, and if the steps are not taken, it can lead to the death of the corals as well. Now what we need to understand is that with regards to corals, global warming has been playing a big role in the destruction of uh, coral reefs. So for example, the warming of the ocean temperatures, Even if the ocean temperature rises by just a couple of degrees Celsius, it can very easily lead to wiping off all the coral reefs. And coral reefs very easily, because they are very sensitive species, they would die very easily. So that is one aspect that we need to understand. Ocean acidification is again something that leads to the death of a lot of corals, because see, corals are very, very important for the health of the aquatic and the marine ecosystem. And with ocean acidification, uh, the conditions that they need for their survival starts to drop. The algae may not be able to survive, and hence they may not be able to provide the required energy to the corals, and that leads to the destruction and the death of the corals as well. So that's why this also leads to a lot of problems. Then the rise in sea levels also adds a lot of fresh water, and hence the mixing of the water with the marine ecosystem can lead to a lot of changes in the aquatic systems, and this can also lead to the death of the corals. And then what we would see is that there has been an increase in the storm intensity, if at all, because of the global warming, because of climate change. And this also has been leading to the death of the corals, to a destruction of the corals, because you might have come across this, that the extreme weather events all across the world has been on a rise. The data all across the world, whether it with regards to the cyclones or the typhoons or the floods or even the droughts, we have seen that the extreme weather events have been on a rise all across the world. And this also means that there have been a lot more intense storms than ever. And this also has led to a lot of deaths in the corals. So that's why there are a lot of issues. Similarly, because of the temperature variations that have been seen, ocean currents also have been changing, and this also has a negative impact on the coral survival. So that's why when it comes to global warming, we see that global warming becomes a very, very crucial aspect of what is leading to the destruction of the corals. So that's why we need to understand the importance of the corals, because for example, the role that corals play in biodiversity, in maintaining the biodiversity in the marine ecosystem. You might know that. So that's why first is with regards to how they main, maintain biodiversity. You might know this, that they are also called as the rainforests of the sea. Have you heard about this, that they also are called as the rainforests of the seas? And why exactly are they called as rainforest? It is mainly because of astonishing biodiversity. They have wonderful biodiversity. Just imagine this, that the habitat that they provide, the breeding grounds that they provide, the protection that they provide, this all leads to an estimated 20-25% of all the marine species. Meaning that whether it is fish or sea mammals or invertebrates, all these different types of species, they are able to survive because of the presence of coral reefs. So approximately 25% of all the marine species. And just imagine that they cover not more than 1% of the ocean floor. Corals corals they cover just 1%. They just cover 1% of the ocean floor, and they are contributing to the survival of 25% of marine species. They support 25% of all the marine species. So that's why they have a big role to play in terms of maintaining marine biodiversity. At the same time, they have very wonderful economic value as well, because whether it is about fishing, because they also support aquaculture. All right, so they have economic value. Now why economic value? Because they support aquaculture. Aquaculture meaning, you can say in a manner, fish and all the other species, they are being protected here, they are being supported here, and that's why these become very good fishing grounds as well. So that's why they help in maintaining aquaculture. So that's why they support aquaculture, they support fishing, and at the same time we see that they also become very major attraction for tourism as well. So that's why they generate billions of dollars annually in terms of the revenue all across the world. Then at the same time, they also provide coastal protection, because they are something that can become natural barriers for all the coastlines. So from the effects of the waves or the storms or even the erosions, they can actually help by absorbing all the wave energy. And they see, what we have observed is that they can help in preventing the loss of life, preventing the loss of preventing the property damage, and even the erosion that can happen across the coastlines. So that's why overall the impact of the hurricanes, impact of the various cyclones, they can actually help the coastal communities from all these kinds of weather events. So that's why they play a very, very important role in coastal protection as well. So that's why the third point can be very important: coastal protection. They help in coastal protection because they help from various different natural phenomena. Then at the same time, what we also see is that they can actually become medical resources as well. We have seen that some of the anti-inflammatory drugs and some of the painkillers actually are coming from marine species which are living in these areas. So that's why the corals are supporting these marine species, and this is where painkillers, etc., can be extracted. So that's why we have seen that they play a major role in that also. And at the same time, a very, very important role that they play is in carbon and nitrogen cycle. They play a very important role in maintaining the carbon and nitrogen cycle. Now, carbon cycle is pretty much, you can say, self-explanatory, because you have the algae, and these algae are doing photosynthesis, and because they are doing photosynthesis, they are removing carbon dioxide from the earth. So that's why they are helping in maintaining the balance of carbon. At the same time, what we see is that they also help in nitrogen fixation, because certain organisms that are living in the reefs, they contribute to nutrient cycling, and hence they help in the productivity or maintaining or enhancing the productivity of the marine ecosystems. So that's why they help in maintaining the carbon and nitrogen cycles as well. So that's why we need to understand all these, and that's why I wanted to take a lot of time in making you understand a lot of these things, because these are the areas from where questions can actually come. So that's why leads needs a lot of importance. So if you look at this question, for example, assess the impact of climate change on coral reefs and evaluate the significance of initiatives like NOAA's Coral Reef Watch in conserving these vital marine ecosystems. Discuss how such programs can be integrated into national and international conservation strategies to mitigate the effects of climate change on coral reefs. So something like this can be asked. So we discussed about the role, we discussed about what role they play in understanding of the coral reefs and giving early warnings, etc. And at the same time, we have to understand how exactly they can be integrated with the national and international conservation strategies, so that we could mitigate the climate change effects on coral reefs. So let's say if a question like this comes, firstly, what you have to do is that you have to talk about what are coral reefs and their ecological importance. Very briefly, you have to do that. And then after that, you come to the body, and where you would write about the impact of climate change, something like that we discussed. Then what is the role of Coral Reef Watch? And then what are the strategies, that how the studies, the research and development from these reports or these kind of programs can also help in making national and international strategies. And then finally, the challenges and the opportunities that we have right now in assessing or in mitigating these strategies. So for example, let's say a lot of these corals, they are in waters which are shared internationally. So that's why there has to be a good cooperation internationally in making sure that we can conserve these corals. So that's why you have to talk about the challenges and the opportunities. And then finally, in case of the conclusion, you can summarize the role that they have, the problems that we are facing with regards to the corals all across the world, and then you can talk about what needs to be done in terms of conservation, in terms of making policies, etc., with regards to corals. So in this manner, if let's say a question like this comes, this is how this question can be answered. Now coming to the second news, and this is about state of the world's migratory species, a report that was published by CMS, or that is the Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals. Now, this is a report that has been published for the first time. Until now, there hasn't been any such report published internationally. But for the first time, the Convention on the uh, Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals, or CMS, it has launched an assessment of the state of world's migratory species. Now, this report basically is talking about what's happening to the migratory species all across the world. For example, it says that almost half of the world's migratory species right now are declining, and more than 20% of such are threatened with extinction. Even, for example, all the CMS listed fish. We'll discuss about that. That what do we mean by CMS, or uh, the conservation of migratory species of wild animal listed fish. Now, what it says is that there are certain problems that we are facing. There are certain issues that are leading to the extinctions and the decline in the population of the world's migratory species. And there are certain, you can say, programs that they're talking about, certain recommendations that they are giving, and they are saying that on the basis of these recommendations we have to take certain steps. The countries over the all across the world, they have to take steps in ensuring that they can conserve the migratory species. Now, this report basically, it has focused on more than approximately 1200 species which are listed under the CMS, and then at the same time there are 3000 additional migratory species also that they have focused upon. And overall, when it comes to the data that they have published, they are saying that globally there are 399 migratory species that are threatened or nearly threatened with extinction, where you also have a lot of birds, there are sharks, there are other animals that are also included, which are not even listed under the CMS. So let's try to understand first and foremost, what do we mean by this CMS? What is this Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals? So overall, when you look at this report, this is exactly what the report has said, that for the first time, it has talked about the compelling evidence of the perils faced by this awe-inspiring animals. And this is where they are saying that the migratory animals are being hit hard, and especially because of over-exploitation and habitat loss, degradation, and fragmentation. So overall, what it says is that almost 20%, as I told you, of CMS listed species are threatened with extinction, and 44% have a decreasing population trend. So overall, we have seen that, especially when it comes to aquatic ecosystems, there are almost 97% of the CMS listed fish that are at risk of extinction. So this is what the report says. Now, with regards to, that's why when you look at the data that has been published by the report, as we discussed, that approximately 20% are threatened with extinction, and 44% have a declining trend in their population. Then 82% of the appendix 1, we'll discuss about what is appendix 1, appendix 2, all these things. So 82% of the appendix 1 species are threatened, 18% of the appendix 2 species are also threatened. So overall, we have seen that there has been a major problem. 90% on an average, we have seen that there is a decline in the CMS listed fish species, and overall, more than 75%, or that is 3 in 4 species, are affected by habitat loss or degradation or fragmentation. So let's try to understand all these things and what exactly are we talking about. So first and foremost, when it comes to the migratory species are the species which would migrate from where to where, which would basically migrate internationally, meaning that they would cross international boundaries, that from one country they are traveling to another country. So if you have species like these are called as migratory species. And we know there are multiple examples of migratory species all across the world. You might have known about a lot of these migratory species that also visit India. For example, a very famous case is of the Siberian cranes that come from right from the very high latitudes. They come to India and to various parts of India during winters, and then they would go back during the summertime. Correct. So there are a lot of these species which are called as migratory species. So first and foremost, when we say that it's a migratory species, When we say that it's a migratory species would mean that these are species which are the ones that cross international boundaries. All right, they are the ones which would cross international boundaries. So then they would be called as migratory species. Now, for all these migratory species, there is a convention. You might have heard of the Bonn Convention. There is a convention called as the Bonn Convention. Now, this Bonn Convention is also called as the Convention on the Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals. Now, this is basically an international treaty which is aimed at the conservation and sustainable use of migratory animals and their habitats. Now, this is something that was established under the UNEP program, and it was signed in 1979. Now, since it was signed in Bonn, which is in Germany, that's why it was called as the Bonn Convention. So it was signed in 1979 and it came in force in 1983. Now, this basically provides a global platform for the protection of the migratory species that cross the international boundaries, and they require cooperation among all the nations for their conservation. Now, when it comes to this convention, they also have been able to recognize the species that are vulnerable, that where their conservation is very necessary, and we have seen that their conservation does not need help only from one country, but it needs to be done by various different countries, and hence it is a convention that was signed by a lot of countries, including India. India also had signed the agreement, and hence India also became a part of this Bonn Convention in 1983. Now, when it comes to this, what we have seen is that the Bonn Convention has listed all the species, all the migratory species, into two appendices. All right. So, as you have seen here, Appendix 1 and Appendix 2. So, this Bonn Convention basically, just remember that this Bonn Convention is for migratory species, for the conservation of the migratory species. All right, now there are two appendices. There is appendix 1 and there is appendix 2. So what appendix 1 says is that appendix 1 would include all the migratory species that are endangered. All right, all the endangered species, all the endangered species all the endangered species will be a part of appendix 1. So that's why all the parties to the convention, they have to ensure that they protect these animals, they conserve or restore the places where they live, and they also have to ensure that whatever be the obstacle to their migration, they can be controlled, and they have to ensure that their population can be uh, maintained well. Then there is Appendix 2. And Appendix 2 basically covers all the migratory species that have a conservation status that would significantly benefit from international cooperation. So that's why you have Appendix 2. So Appendix 2 basically will have all the migratory species that have some kind of conservation status. They have a conservation status that needs international cooperation. All right, they have conservation status that needs international cooperation, and that's why it is more about encouraging the global or the regional agreements to address specific issues which are required for maintaining these migratory species. Now, try to understand what's happening with the migratory species. What are the various factors that are leading to their problems? And this is where this report specifically talks about these four aspects. What are these four aspects? First is over exploitation. Now, this over exploitation can happen because of various different reasons. For example, it can be because of harvesting, it can be because of trading, it can be because of the consumption of the migratory species. So, for example, let's say use of the wild meat many a times, or using them for making some kind of products, maybe in handicraft, maybe in clothing. So that also becomes a problem. Many times they are also used as pets, they are also hunted. They are, I mean, uh, because of sport, some kind of sporting beliefs or something like that. So that's why we see that there are multiple different factors that are leading to the problem. So over exploitation, so over exploitation happening because of their hunting, right? Because of their hunting. At the same time, the trading, then using them as products. Products meaning, let's say, whether it is clothes, etc. So hunting, trading, using them as products, or even uh, consumption of their meat many a times. So because in many of the countries they become very, you can say, very high end meat products, and they are also sold in the markets many a times. They are also used as pets. Petting is also done, and that also becomes very costly, and hence it has a market of its own. So there are all these issues that we have. And overall, when we see that this over exploitation can specifically lead to less of their movement from one place to another. So that's why we have seen that especially a significant part of the appendix 2 species are considered to be a problem, considered to have a problem with over exploitation. Then there is habitat loss, degradation, and fragmentation. Now, this is one of the major problems worldwide, because it is something that impacts the quality and the availability uh, of the habitat that we have for all these migratory species. And that's why we have seen that it has a major problem. It creates a major problem for all the population all across the world, or for many of these species. So whether it is, let's say, fish or freshwater migratory fish, we have seen that construction of dam, for example, can be uh, something that can lead to significant pressure on the freshwater ecosystem. And that's why we'll see that there will be a disruption in the flow of water, and this will lead to these migratory fish species losing out on their habitat. At the same time, we have seen that there are a lot of issues. So for example, when we talk about fragmentation, so what happens is that when a lot of, let's say, infrastructure development happens in their habitats, so a larger habitat will be fragmented into smaller habitats like these, and hence it restricts the movement of all these migratory species. So that also leads to a lot of a lot more, you can say, decrease in their population. So there are a lot of these kind of issues that we have, and hence habitat loss, degradation, and fragmentation also becomes a major problem. So that's why, especially with regards to infrastructure, especially with regards to infrastructure, example, construction of dams, it can lead to a reduced movement of these species. Then different barriers to the migratory movements. So for example, there can be two types of barriers that you can think of: physical barriers and the non-physical barriers. Physical barriers could be, you construct roads, you construct railways, dams, etc. They will be called as physical barriers. And then there are non-physical barriers. Non-physical barriers could be pollution, for example, or industrial development in a certain area. So we have seen that these also can be contributing factors. So that's why barriers, when we say, there are two types of barriers that this report talks about: physical barriers, physical barriers like roads, etc., and non-physical barriers. Non-physical barriers could be pollution. So that's why all these can also lead to lesser amount of movement of all these species. And especially when it comes to these, they can actually become barriers, and they can disrupt very crucial habitat corridors. And hence we'll see that there will be a major problem in the movement of all these migratory species. And then lastly, of course, climate change and pollution are major problems. We know that climate change has been altering the ecosystems, and they have been changing the ecological dynamics all across the world. And this is also leading to newer challenges, or introduction of newer challenges to the survival of all these species. And at the same time, pollution can also become a major barrier. You will see that many a times, for example, pesticides. Very recently also it was in the news that because of consumption of pesticides, many of the birds in Kerala, they lost their lives. So similarly, we see that whether it is pesticides or consumption of plastics or heavy metals, all these can also lead to a lot of issues. Even light pollution, even light pollution, very strong lights that you have all across the world right now, that also leads to the reduction in their movements. So that also compounds to the threat that all these migratory species have. And all these factors, they contaminate their environments, and hence they will lead to lesser movements of these migratory species. So that's why we have to understand that there are all these factors that lead to reduction in the movement of these migratory species. So this is what the report has been talking about. Then when it comes to all these migratory species, the report also talks about a lot of importance, that what is the importance of all these migratory species. So for example, how they help in nutrient cycling, how they help in pollination and seed dispersal, how they help in regulation of the ecosystems. So we see that there are multiple different ways in which they are helping. So for example, they help in maintaining the biodiversity of any given ecosystem. So for example, any ecosystem through which they travel, they would help in maintaining the biodiversity of that area or of that habitat. They help in the distribution of various different types of plant species. Some of the birds and the mammals, they are also very key pollinators, or they help in the dispersion of the seeds. For example, fruit bats. If i if you have to take as an example, we have the example of fruit bats. So in case of fruit bats, what we see is that they would eat all these fruits, and they would just disperse the seeds of these fruits and help in maintaining of the biodiversity of a given area. At the same time, we have monarch butterflies as well. So they would also travel thousands of kilometers all across the continent, and they would also help in various they would also play a very important role in the pollination of the flowers across their migratory path. So that's why they play a very, very important role at this. So, and that's why there are multiple different examples. So for example, let's say if you talk about the European eel, it plays a very, very important role in the freshwater food web, and they are the ones, they help in maintaining the food web in a given area. Then they also obviously help in nutrient cycling. So because they would help in nutrient cycling from one place to another, and that's why they help in the enriching of the areas which are specifically poor in their nutrient environments. So that's why they play a very, very important role. So European eel can play a very important role. Salmon fish plays a very, very important role in the oceans, because they are the ones which would from the ocean to the freshwater ecosystem, they would bring all the essential nutrients to the rivers. And that's why the river ecosystem will be flourished because of the salmon movement from the oceans to the freshwater ecosystem. So that's why a lot of the aquatic life which are there in the freshwater ecosystem will be helped by these salmons. So that is also where they play a major important role. Then we see that they also play a major important role in maintaining the predator prey dynamics, because they would help in ensuring that they would regulate the population size of any given area. And hence, especially for both the health of the predators and the prey species, they are very, very crucial. And we see that there are multiple different ways in which they play a major role. Similarly, if you see other examples, let's say even if you talk about the Indian examples, let's say if we take, so you have the hunchback whale. You have the hunchback whales. So these hunchback whales, they or you have the olive Ridley sea turtles. So in case of India, you can say that these are playing very, very important role, because they help in maintaining the ecosystems of wherever they live, and that's where they play a very, very important role. Even there are species that play a very important economic role, because for example, let's say again the salmon fish, they help in the fishing of the area, especially in the Pacific. So they have an important role to play. Then they play a role in tourism as well, because they will help in maintaining tourism, because a lot of uh, uh, people will be coming to, sorry, these are the humpback whales. So they would play a major important role in people also visiting these areas and coming to these areas just to watch these species. So all these species, they play a very important role. Even some of them have very important cultural and social importance as well. We have seen that there are some of these migratory species which are also seen to bring good luck, and they have been a very very important role. They have been playing a very prominent role in the traditions and the stories and all the spiritual beliefs all across the world. So for example, if we take the example of, let's say, the cranes, many in many of the Asian cultures, we have seen that the cranes are supposed to be a symbol of luck. So that's why they are celebrated in festivals as well. So that's why we see that there are a lot of these migratory species which play a very very important role all across the world. And that's why ensuring their safety, ensuring their security in maintaining their populations becomes very very crucial. So for example, let's say when you take the example of olive ridley turtles, they do play a very very important role. And we have seen that when it comes to the beaches of Odisha, they would be found there, and they would migrate thousands of kilometers across the ocean to lay their eggs in the same beaches where they were born. And that's they play a very very important role in maintaining the marine ecosystem, including the health of the seagrass and the coral reefs which are there in the nearby areas. Similarly, when it comes to the humpback whales, they also play a very very important role when it comes to the western coast of India in the Arabian Sea. So they help in maintaining the marine biodiversity of that area, and they're also in considered as a very important indicator of the health of the marine ecosystems in that area. So that's why from that perspective it becomes a very very they play a very important role in all these situations. So look at this question, a very simple question. Let's say if at all uh, a question comes, which of the following are identified as major threats to migratory species: habitat loss and degradation, overexploitation, pollution, climate change. So obviously, as we discussed, that the answer to this question will be all of the above. They all play an important role in the threat. Now, coming to another important topic, and this is a topic that was discussed in the Down to Earth magazine in the month of February. And this is about a particular problem that we have been seeing in North India, especially the states of Haryana and Punjab. Now, there's a scheme also that has been mentioned here, and the name of the scheme is Mera Pani, Meri Virasat. Now let's try to understand what exactly are we talking about here and what is the problem. So first let's start with the problem. If you look at these two maps will give you an idea about what's happening with regards to the groundwater levels in Haryana. So if you look at these two maps, this is a map of 2010 versus a map of 2020, where if you look at the areas of severe groundwater stresses, you'll see that these areas have been increasing, correct? If you look at the 2010 map, you see that these are smaller areas, smaller fragmented areas, and in 2020 map, these are much larger areas than they used to be. So hence we see that this has been a major problem, that there has been a decline in the groundwater levels, especially in Haryana and also in Punjab. Now, to tackle these problems, there are certain schemes that have been launched by the government. One of these schemes is Mera Pani Mera Virasat, Meri Virasat scheme, that was initiated by the government back in 2020. This was a scheme that was launched by the government of Haryana back in 2020. Now, this basically is a scheme that incentivizes the farmers to cultivate the crops other than paddy so that they can address the falling groundwater levels. And this is something that has become a widespread issue in Haryana, as the map suggests. So that's why in this particular scheme, there are financial rewards that are being given for growing alternative crops, right? So either they should grow alternative crops, or they should just leave their ground or their fields fallow. They should not grow anything. So for that, when it comes to the farmers, and the farmers, let's say if the farmers are following this, that either they're moving to alternative crops or they're leaving the land fallow, then in that case there are financial incentives which are being given by the government. So that is exactly what this scheme has been about. Because we know that I'm very sure that you have come across this, that when it comes to paddy cultivation needs a lot of water. So hence it becomes a very challenging situation when it comes to the use of water, and especially when it comes to these states where the paddy cultivation is extreme. Now, so that's why this scheme was launched in 2020. Now what this scheme does is that it offers rupees 7,000. It offers rupees 7,000 per acre. It offers rupees 7,000 per acre for cultivating alternative crops in the fields other than paddy. Now, why exactly this? When you look at, there was a survey that was done for the groundwater levels in Haryana. And according to these reports, the survey that was conducted, it indicated that 67% of Haryana's villages have declining groundwater levels. 67%. All right. So the survey said that 67% of the Haryana villages have seen declining groundwater. Have seen declining groundwater. And because of this, the stress on the water levels have been increasing. So that's why what we saw was that this scheme was launched, that if, let's say, the farmers are ready to leave paddy cultivation, they would be paid. So overall, what we saw was that in 2020, there was approximately 25,000 hectares of paddy fields that were shifted to other crops. In 2021, also, again, we saw that some 20,000 hectares were converted uh, no, to other crops. And in 2022, we saw that there were approximately, the target area was approximately 40,000 hectares, where we saw that approximately 23,000 hectares were found to be eligible. So that's why we saw that there, we have seen that the farmers also have been contributing here, and the farmers also have been leaving this kind of cultivation, the paddy cultivation, and moving to either other crops, or even leaving their fields fallow. Because the from the side of the farmer also, they have talked about of certain problems, that when it comes to paddy, and you need flooding of the field, right? In case of growing paddy, you need flooding of the field. That leads to the degradation of the soil quality over time as well. So what happens is that over a period of time, the soil will be not as fertile as it used to be. So that's why for the farmers also, it is not good in long term. Similarly, uh, you know that the amount of water that they need is very severe. The amount of greenhouse gas emission, especially methane emission from these fields, is also severe. So there are all these problems that we have, and hence we saw that there was this financial incentive scheme that was launched by the government of Haryana. And what we have seen is that under this scheme, approximately 45 crore rupees were distributed in 2020, and 31 crores were distributed in 2021. So financial incentives worth rupees 45 crores were given in 2020, and worth rupees 31 crores were given in 2021. So we have seen that it has been leading to significant improvement in all these cases as well. Now, apart from this, what we also see is that there are other schemes that they have been talking about. So other schemes, for example, there is something called as direct seeded rice. Let me come to that first, that what exactly do we see. So there are two types of mitigation steps that have been proposed when it comes to alternates to paddy cultivation, and the problems with paddy cultivation, will come back to it. So what we know is that there are two kinds of problems. What are the two kinds of problems? First problem has been, there are two kinds of, sorry, there are two kinds of solutions. One solution is alternate wetting and drying, and the second one is direct seeded rice. Now when it comes to direct seeded rice, even this has a financial incentive. So if, let's say, any farmer is using DSR or direct seeded rice, then in that case they would also be paid an incentive of rupees 4,000 per acre for using this. All right, they would be paid rupees 4,000 per acre for using direct seeded rice. So that's why we see that overall, when it comes to, again, if let's say when we just talk about the data, what we have seen is that the DSR cultivation has led to almost 30,000 hectares were saved, and approximately it saved approximately, you can say, uh, three, I think, 300 million. Uh, Sorry, 30,000. The total figure was, I think, 3 lakh million liters of water. All right, yeah, this much, approximately this million liters of water was saved in 2022, just because of this particular uh, method that is called as direct seeded rice. Now understand what is direct seeded rice. So it saved this much of water, and there was a financial incentive of approximately 29 crore rupees given by the government of Haryana for using this particular method. Now, understand what is this method. What do we mean by direct seeded rice? Now, in case of direct seeded rice, this is a method of rice cultivation where the seeds are directly sown into the field rather than coming from somewhere. So, instead of using a nursery and then transplanting it from the nursery to the field, which is the normal method. All right. So, normal method is that you first grow the seeds in the nursery, and from there on, you take it to the field, and then after that, the rice is grown there. But in case of direct seeded rice, you do not grow it in the nursery. Instead, the seeds are directly sown into the field. All right, they are directly sown into the field, and this is something where we see that it would be able to save a lot of water, and that's why we have seen that this is a financial incentive scheme also that has been started by the government of Haryana. So when it comes to, for example, when you look at these two figures, in case of the transplanted rice, first it will be grown somewhere, and then you will see that it would be taken to the fields, and they would be sown by the farmers in the flooded field, right, in the flooded field. Whereas in case of direct seeded rice, you'll see that they would directly be grown in the field itself instead of carrying it from somewhere else. So that also leads to much lesser use of water, and that's why we talked about saving of almost 3 lakh million liters of water in just 1 year by using this direct seeded rice. And this led to almost distribution of financial incentive of 29 crore rupees by the government of Haryana. Now, what are the advantages of direct seeded rice? First, obviously, a reduced labor and water usage. So that's why lower cost, and that's why we'll see that it will also lead to earlier crop maturity as well. So the crops can grow faster. So that is one major advantage that you might have. Then the total cost is lesser, total labor requirement is lesser. So overall, the water usage is lesser. So that's why we see that there are a lot of advantages that direct seeded rice might have, although it can lead to more weed competition or more weed growth in these kind of areas. So that's why we need better weed management when it comes to the use of the direct seeding method. So that's one point to be considered as a part of the direct seeded rice. Otherwise, what we see is that it helps in reducing the amount of water. It also helps in reducing methane emission, and at the same time, less labor requirement, less labor requirement, and overall, that's why less cost. So that's why overall the cost of growing paddy or growing rice will be lesser. So that's why it becomes very, very crucial, and that's why it has been gaining popularity all across. Hence, we need to understand this. So that's why, as you can see, that it can save up to approximately 20 to 30% of water. Although the report that was there in the Down to Earth magazine, the farmers have claimed that it actually saves up to 40% of water. They reduce the requirement of water by 40%, is what has been quoted in that report. Although usually we see that 20 to 30% less water is required in case of direct seeded rice. So overall, this is the case. Similarly, cost reduction happens. Cost can be reduced by 20 to 30%. Similarly, the labor requirement also is lesser by 30 to 40%. So there are all these things that we have seen. So overall, we see that it can lead to potentially a lot of advantages. And that's why we have seen that off late it has been gaining a lot of importance and gaining uh, it is also becoming very popular all across. So that is where we see that direct seeded rice becomes very important. Then another mitigation effort has been alternate wetting and drying. And this is also something that can reduce the methane emission by up to 48% and water requirement by 15 to 30%. Now, what we do in this particular technique is that if you look at the picture that you have, instead of directly just flooding the rice fields, what we do is that there is an intermittent flooding, intermittent irrigation of the rice field, allowing the soil to first partially dry up, and then after that it is reflooded. So instead of maintaining a continuous layer of water, as you can see here, instead of maintaining a particular layer of water all across, what we see is that first you would use water for irrigation, and then the rice field will be flooded, and then you will let it absorb. And once it has absorbed, once let's say the moisture levels are little lower, again you would reflood the fields. So in that case the amount of water required also starts to decrease. So that is where we see that it becomes very very crucial. So that's why these are two methods. Now why are we using these methods? Because we see that when it comes to paddy cultivation has a lot of environmental impacts. Now what are the environmental impacts? First is water use. Now in case of water use, just understand this, that rice cultivation all across the world covers approximately 11% of the land, approximately 11% of the land. Whereas when it comes to the water consumption, it consumes 34 to 43% of the global water, 34 to 43% of the irrigated water worldwide, 43% of irrigated water worldwide. So that's a huge. And just growing just 1 kg of rice, do you know, for growing just 1 kg of rice, how much of water, how many liters of water might be required? Do you have any idea about that in numbers? Yeah, approximately worldwide figure says approximately 2500 liters. Approximately 2500 liters of water is required just for 1 kg of rice. So that's why it's a big problem. So in case of water use, we understand that paddy has a problem. Then in case of greenhouse gas emission, now when it comes to the rice cultivation, again what we have seen is that they contribute to approximately 10% of agriculture sector's methane emission globally. So 10%, almost 10%, 10% of agricultural methane, 10% of agricultural methane is just emitted by paddy cultivation globally. And when it comes to methane, we know that methane is a greenhouse gas and it can have a big problem for our environment. Then after that, it can also lead to agrochemical pollution as well. We have seen that a lot of nitrogen based fertilizers are used in the rice fields, and that also leads to the emission of the nitrous oxides. It can lead to emission of nitrous oxides. Now these nitrous oxides, or N2O, nitrous oxides are even far worse than carbon dioxide or methane when it comes to their effect as a greenhouse gas. They can have up to 300 times worse impact on our climate as compared to carbon dioxide. 300 times. So just imagine the kind of issues that they create. So that's why we understand that they lead to a lot of agrochemical pollution as well. Then they can have a negative impact on the soil health. When it comes to continuous flooding of the soil, this can lead to a lot of iron toxicity, for example, and it can lead to decrease in the yield of the soil. So that is also one problem. Then it can also lead to reduction in the biodiversity. We have seen that a lot of habitat loss also has happened because of all these areas becoming dependent on irrigation. So certain species are affected, and then we see that their habitat is also lost. So there are a lot of issues. Then we see that there is rice straw burning, and we have been coming across the smog situation that it creates in states like Punjab and Haryana because of the uh, burning of the straw. So there is a problem there also with regards to, for example, let's say a specific variety of paddy which is grown in Punjab, that is called as Pusa 44. Now, this variety is something that was introduced in 1994 by the Council of Agricultural Research in the Indian Agricultural Research Institute, and it became very popular. It became very popular because it has very high yield compared to the other paddy varieties. It was showing better yield. Now, what we have seen is that its cultivation uh, uses excess of water. The water requirements are huge, and this is where they also produce a lot of crop residue. So the burning of the residue has been a major problem, and hence because of these two problems we have seen that the Punjab Agricultural University in 2017 declared it as non-recommended. But still we have not seen anything significant happen in that, and hence it still remains a problem altogether. So that's why this specific variety of paddy for groundwater in Punjab also creates a lot of issues, because the water requirements are huge, and it also leads to air pollution effects later when the burning of the crops residue happen. So overall, that's why we see that there are all these problems that we are looking at, and hence there are all these recommendations and various effects that we are seeing. So a question like this, for example, can come in your paper: evaluate the role of government incentives in encouraging the farmers to adopt sustainable agricultural practices, provide suggestions to improve the implementation of such schemes for enhanced agricultural sustainability in India. So these kind of questions they can ask, and there are, I mean, we have just discussed some of the issues mainly with regards to the groundwater problem, right? We have mainly discussed about the groundwater problem, but there are a lot of other things which can be done. For example, providing the financial support in risk mitigation, in conservation of the resources, in building awareness among the farmers as well, what they should grow, what they shouldn't, and all these things, so that they can move towards sustainable agricultural practices. And providing financial support for these will also always help. So for example, a scheme like uh, what we have discussed, and whether it is growing the direct seeded rice, or whether it is about the water management schemes, all these schemes also help a lot. So that's why there are all these things. And then there are various suggestions that we also have. For example, how exactly we can broaden the scope of the crop techniques and crops and the techniques that we can use, and at the same time providing the training, the support, and providing financial incentives. So there are all these things that can also help in improvement of agricultural productivity in the country. So there are all these things that can be mentioned. Now, coming to another topic that has been in the news and a lot of controversy for the last 4 5 months, and this is Forest Conservation Amendment Act of 2023. Now, what we have seen is that although this act is old, but there is a new ruling by the Supreme Court, and what the Supreme Court says is that the states and union territories must act as per definition given in the Godavaram judgment. Now, understand what exactly is this judgment and what are the problems that we are looking at. So, first and foremost, when it comes to what happened, what exactly has been in the news, and this is a very recent news that we see. So, the Supreme Court, what the Supreme Court has done is that there was an interim order that was passed by them on 19th of February, and it emphasized that the states and the union territories must adhere to the definition of the forest that was given under the 1996 judgment. Now, what exactly is this definition? So we'll try to understand what this definition is and what are the issues that we are looking at with regards to the amendment that was made in the 2023 in the 2023 amendment that was made. Now, first, what exactly is the Supreme Court saying? Supreme Court says that first, the government and the union territories, they have to follow the definition that was given for the forest according to the 1996 TN Godavaram judgment, Varman judgment. Now, what it basically says is, if you go back to the judgment basically tried to define what the forest should be. That go, what the judgment had said is that don't just take the official definition of the forest. Anything that should be considered as a forest, that you think is a forest, should be considered as a forested land, and then it should be considered as a forest. And it should not be only the historic and the official definition of the forest. We have to go beyond just the dictionary meaning or the dictionary definition of the forest, is what the 1996 judgment had said. Now in 2023, the amendment to the Forest Conservation Act has been done. Now, what basically the controversy that we have here is, the controversy has been around the requirement of the land to be either notified as a forest, or to be specifically recorded in the government records to be considered as a forest. Meaning that if it is not historically defined as a forest, or if the land is not officially described by the government as a forest, then in that case it will not be considered as a forest. So this is where the controversy begins, because now what happens is that according to the rules that we have as a part of this amendment act, that is the One Sanrakshan and One Sanrakshan Evam Samvardhan rules of 2023, all the states and all the union territories, they are supposed to prepare records of all the forests within 1 year from the notification of the amendment. Now, where is the concern? The concern is over the non forest use of the forested land. Because the 1996 judgment said that anything that looks like a forest should also be considered as a forest, and you just don't consider all the official definitions for the forest. You go beyond the official definitions as well. And this was precisely to protect the forested land, because ultimately what we have seen is that there has been a significant decrease in the forested land. So just try to understand and go back briefly into the history. So first and foremost, what exactly was the 1980 act? First time the Forest Conservation Act came in 1980, and this 1980 act was exactly to save the forest. All right, this was aimed as the at the conservation of the forest, to regulate the diversion of the forested land for the non-forest purposes. Now, why exactly this? Because between 1950 to 1975, all right, between 1950 to 1975, what we have seen is that in India, approximately hectare 40 lakh hectare of forested land was used for non-forest activities. 40 lakh hectares. So that's why it became very important for the government to bring an act, bring a law that can conserve the forested land. And this is where the 1980 Act came in. That it was basically enacted to address the concerns over the rapid decline of the forest, which not only affected biodiversity but also impacted ecological balance and the livelihood of all the communities which were dependent on these forests. So that's why there were various parts, there were various things that were given as a part of this particular act. So as a part of this act, we saw that all these various things were brought into uh, the notice. And now what we see is that with regards to the Forest Amendment, Forest Conservation Act, all these things were there. So what we see is that overall the new amendment tries to change some of these parameters that were given as a part of this act or the original act. So now the Supreme Court has said that the it should be we have to go back to some of the guidelines that were given by the 1996 judgment, because that judgment also tried to add to the forested areas and not only the officially recorded areas. Now, in this particular scenario, when it comes to all these aspects, first was restriction on the de-reservation, that how exactly all these forested land should not go to non-forested areas, it should not be considered as non-forested areas. Then approval for the non-forest use, meaning that if any authority or let's say any organization or even a state government, if they want to use a forested land for non-forest purposes, then in that case they have to go to the central government, they have to take permission from the central government, and then only they can use it for non forest activities. So that's why that was done. And then, so forest land should not, the basic idea was that the forest land should not be used for non-forest area of non-forest activities. For example, industrial activities or mining activities or construction of dams, etc. They should not be done without having a proper clearance from the government of India. So that was something that was done. And then after that, the compensatory afforestation was also taken into account with regards to this particular 1980 act. And as a part of this act, what we see is that in cases where the forest land is being diverted for all the non-forest purposes, the act said that there has to be a compensatory afforestation, where an equivalent area of non-forest land must also be afforested, or a degraded forest land maybe should be regenerated, so as to compensate for all the land losses that has happened, or the forest cover losses that has happened because of certain activities. So that's why we see that there was all these things done. And then there were the advisory committees that were also set up, so that anything that the central government needs help with, they can always go to these advisory committees. And then there were severe penalties also that were given for the violation of many of these activities. So we, that's why we see that there are all these things that were given as a part of the 1980 act. And then when it comes to the 2023 act, there are certain things that have been changed. And how the things have been changed, that wherever there is no official definition of forest, the government is saying that then in that case we will not consider that as forest. Now this is a big problem, and this is where all the controversy arises from, because then it will lead to a lot of areas which are not really, let's say, historically recorded, or in the government data, if it has not been recorded as a forest, then it will lose its importance. Correct, it will lose its importance. And this is precisely where the 1996 case was very, very important, because it talked about a broad definition of forest. What the Supreme Court had ruled, that the definition of the forest in the context of the Forest Conservation Act should not be limited only to the dictionary meaning of these areas, but also should go beyond the dictionary meanings or beyond the government records. Instead, it should include all the areas that are forest in ecological sense. And that's why it then started to include all these areas as well, which until now were not a part of just the official records. So what it said is that anything or any land that can be considered as forest as per a broad definition of forest, a broad definition beyond official records, beyond official records and the dictionary meaning. So that can be considered as forest as per the broad definition beyond official records and dictionary meaning, should also be considered as forest land. It should also be considered as a forest. So this is what the 1996 ruling was. So now in this particular scenario, what we see is that irrespective of the ownership, irrespective of the classification. So let me just write this also. Irrespective of the ownership or classification, irrespective of ownership of classification, these lands have to be considered as forest. This is what this particular case said. Now this is where it led to a new controversial subject, which is a deemed forest. Now when it comes to deemed forest are basically lands that appear to be like a forest, but they have not been notified so by the government or even in historical records. So that is what we mean by deemed forest. So when it comes to deemed forest, these basically are lands not noted as forest in government records, government or historical records. All right, not noted as forest as government or historic records, but appear to be like forests. Like forests. So they will all be considered, they are called as deemed forests. Now, these deemed forests are where the controversy is. That, for example, we have seen that there have been multiple articles. There has been just one article just a couple of days back in the Hindu, and there is this older article that I've taken from the Indian Express. Now, in all these cases, we are talking about the deemed forest only. We are talking about the deemed forest in both these cases. So this is where we see all the controversy lies, because you have not defined them officially. In the government records, it doesn't show as forest. In the historic records, it doesn't show as forest. So that's why these are the lands which are under threat. Now, as soon as, for example, in October, the amendment to the act was made. As soon as the amendment was made, there is a private university being built, a private college being built in Haryana, which lies in the Aravali Hills. So, in the Aravali forest. So, until now, until the time that this amendment was made, this was illegal. This construction was supposed to be illegal because this was a deemed forest. But now, as soon as the amendment is made, now this is not in the government records as forest. It has not been noted as forest. So now it can be cut off. Now the university can just cut off the entire hilly area or entire forested area, and they can build a university there. They can build the college there, because now it's all legal. And that's why the problem lies, that it does not say, the amendment does not say that only henceforth this will be deemed to be legal. It also goes ex facto. It says that even before, I mean, even before this timeline of this amendment, you can go back and all these, let's say if there was, suppose that you started uh, uh, constructing your property on an illegal land, or let's say on a forested land, and then the government agencies came and said that no, this is forested land, you cannot do any construction here. So then you had to stop because now it was illegal. But because of this amendment, now it will be legal and you can just cut off the forest and you can start building. So what has happened is that it will have a wide repercussion for a lot of areas. For example, when you consider the areas of Goa, for example, in Goa there are a lot of these areas which are deemed forest, and all these deemed forests can now be lost. Similarly, in Karnataka, the problem that happened a few years back, especially in this 2020 case, was that almost I think 6 lakh hectares were deemed forest areas, were just denotified, and they were said that they can be used now and they will not be considered as forest because they are not uh, they have been not noted as a forest in the government records. So all of a sudden, all these forested areas which are supposed to be forests, which are deemed forest, will now be lost, because now you can do developmental activities in all these areas. So this is where the problem lies. This is what the core issue is when it comes to an amendment like this. And that's why there are so many, we have seen that a lot of PILs have been filed, lot of citizens, a lot of environmentalists, they all have been opposing this amendment. So that's why these kind of amendments become very crucial for us also to understand that what can happen next because of these rulings that have been made. So that's why you have to understand the parts of the controversy and where the historic problems have been, and where all these newer controversies also start coming in. So this, for example, a question like this can be asked: examine examine the implications of the Forest Conservation Amendment Act of 2023 on India's forest governance, biodiversity, and indigenous communities. Critically analyze how the amendment aligns with India's commitment to environmental conservation and sustainable development goals. Because the government says something else. The government says that because any area that can that looks like a forest will be considered as a forest, so many of the private individuals, they don't want to grow orchids, they do not want to grow anything on their land, because if it looks like a forest, then in that case it will be considered as a forest, and the private individuals will not be able to use their land anymore, so they are afraid of using that land. and hence they don't use that land for these kind of activities, and the kind of carbon sink that we want to create cannot be created if this amendment was not made. But unfortunately these are not well placed arguments, because when you say private individuals, generally the private individual does not own such a big piece of land that you will say that all these areas cannot be now they cannot be cultivated, I mean they cannot be forested, and all these problems would happen. Unfortunately these are not well placed ideas, but this is what the government has been saying, that it is aligning with India's pledges and India's targets, and that is why this law has been made, this amendment to the law has been made. But what we have seen is quite opposite of that. We've seen that the first construction that has happened is an international institute of something in Haryana, and this is where uh, it was an illegal construction until now. Now it has become a legal construction. So that's why that is where we have to also understand the issues that it can lead to. So that's why there are these things that you can write, that what exactly is the amendment, and what are the issues that we are looking at. So overall, the shift in power that will happen, that now you do not need central government or the central government to give you the permission, and the state governments can give the permission and the local authorities can give the permission. We know that in that particular scenario there are a lot of issues that will happen, a lot of areas will very easily be notified, and a lot of forested areas will lose its canopy. So that's why we need to understand all these potential problems, and how it can lead to ecological imbalance and a lot of loss in habitat and all those area, all these problems, even for the forest dwellers, even for the local communities living in these kind of areas. So that's why there are all these things that you can write, and overall you can talk about a way forward of what could have been done and what needs to be done, how we need to look at a scientific management of the forest and understanding of all these things. That even in case of this amendment also, it is one of the controversies also has been that it was never referred to uh, any committee, any science and environment based committees were not considered here, and there was a joint parliamentary committee that was uh, uh, taken into account, and they just notified this. So that's why there are so many controversies all across. Then another topic, although not a very big topic, blue economy 2.0. Now this blue economy 2.0 is something which was talked about in the interim budget of this year. Now, what exactly do we mean by blue economy? So, when it comes to blue economy, we talk about the economic activities which are related to the sea and the coasts. And generally, we are talking about the various factors of sustainability which are related to this. So, all the economic activities which are related to the oceans, to the seas, and even the coasts, all these are considered as a part of the blue economy. Now, when it comes to blue economy 2.0, this exactly is what our finance minister Nirmala Sitharaman had said while talking about blue economy 2.0, that it is something for promoting climate resilient activities for blue economy 2.0, a scheme for restoration and adaptation measures, and coastal aquaculture and mariculture with integrated and multi-sectoral approach will be launched. Now, let's just try to understand these two words. What do we mean by aquaculture and what do we mean by mariculture? This is exactly what you need out of this blue economy, because it was very vague in the way it was described. So that's why there is not a lot that we have to focus upon as of now. So, what do we mean by aquaculture? Aquaculture basically is something which is also called as aqua farming. It is the farming of the fish or all the other aquatic species. For example, the mollusks, or let's say the crustaceans, or all the aquatic plants, algae. So all the aquatic elements. All right. So it basically will be about the cultivation of the fresh water and the salt water population, uh, which come uh, under the the ambit of all the aquatic systems. So whether it is any water body, whether it is pond or whether it is a river or a lake, or even a man-made system like even a tank, so all these will be called as aquaculture. And this aquaculture will be used for various different purposes. It can be used for providing food, or restoration of the threatened species of various aquatic populations. So there are multiple ways in which it can be used, and it can be used for freshwater aquaculture. It can also be used for marine aquaculture. So when it comes to the marine aquaculture, this is where it is also called as mariculture, because marine aquaculture, hence called as mariculture. So mariculture is a specialized branch of aquatic uh, aquaculture, you can say. And in this particular scenario, we are specifically talking about the marine organisms in the open oceans, and also in the open oceans or any enclosed section of the ocean, or even in case of the tanks, ponds, and raceways which are filled with seawater. So largely we are talking about the cultivation of the marine organisms. So that is what is called as mariculture. So that's why mariculture will be based on the fish or the shellfish, seaweeds, all these in their natural marine environment. And it is something that can be conducted in the coastal areas or even in the deep seas, and it can also help in enhancing the production of the marine species, for whether it is for food or whether it is for trade or even for the restoration of the endangered species. So that is what we call as mariculture. So that's why just remember these two words in the context of Blue Economy 2.0. First, what is Blue Economy? So Blue Economy is any economic activity related to especially the oceans. And in that case, because these two words have been mentioned in the budget speech, so just remember the meaning of these two words: what is aquaculture and what is mariculture. Now, so if you see something like this can be asked as a question for you, consider the following statements regarding aquaculture and mariculture. Aquaculture involves the cultivation of aquatic organisms both in freshwater and marine environments under controlled conditions. This is correct. This is what we had discussed. Mariculture is a subset of aquaculture. This is specifically focused on the farming of marine species in open oceans, enclosed part of the ocean, or tanked or filled with seawater. This is also correct. Then promoting these activities include a scheme for restoration and adaptation measures that exclusively focuses on freshwater aquaculture. This is wrong because it talks about both aquaculture and mariculture in case of the Blue Economy 2.0. So that's why exclusively is wrong. So third statement is wrong. So correct answer will be A, 1 and 2 only. Now coming to all the smaller topics which do not need a lot of discussion, but somewhat they can be important indirectly. First is 5 more Indian wetlands have been added to the Ramsar list. Now, in case of the Ramsar list, we are talking about the Ramsar sites, and there are new additions that have been done to the Ramsar sites. And if you see, there are these 5. So out of the 5, there are 3 that come from Karnataka, and there are 2 which come from Tamil Nadu. So these 5 have been added to the Ramsar sites. Now, with regards to when it comes to the Ramsar site, just understand the basics of Ramsar site. Now, this Ramsar site comes as a part of the Ramsar Convention, and this Ramsar Convention largely is for the conservation of the wetlands, right? Conservation of the wetlands. And in case of the conservation of the wetlands, this is an international treaty that was signed. And then after that, a Ramsar list was made so that all these wetlands can be added, so that specifically conservation of these wetlands can be done nationally or internationally. So that is why it came into existence. Now, overall, it was basically to address the global decline of the wetlands and their resources, and understanding of recognizing of the wetlands and the ecosystems and the importance that we have of all these wetland ecosystems. So that's why it came into existence. Now, overall, when it comes to the Ramsar sites, it is largely for uh, the conservation of the wetlands. So one thing that becomes important for us to understand the importance of these wetlands, that why exactly do we even have this Ramsar convention, and why do we have all these wetlands which are noted as Ramsar sites, which have been included as Ramsar sites. Now, when it comes to the importance of wetlands, we see that there are various aspects where wetlands play a very, very important role in ecological and environmental sense. So overall, uh, Overall, when it comes to the importance of the wetlands, first you have to understand the role that they play in mitigation of many of the extreme weather events, because these wetlands, they act as a barrier between the land and the sea. These wetlands, in many of these cases, many of these areas across the world, they become a barrier. And now, because of this barrier, what happens is that they would also help in mitigating of many of these, let's say, tropical cyclones or any of the very strong storms. They would be able to hold them there. So that's why they play a very very important role in maintaining of all these yes, ecosystems, which are especially in the coastal areas. Then apart from that, we see that they become very very crucial in various different aspects as well. For example, when it comes to the water quality, they add to the water quality, they help in maintaining water quality. Now, how exactly do they do that? Because when it comes to the wetlands, in case of the wetlands, they actually can become natural water purifiers. They help in the filtration of the sediments, and they help in the absorption of many of the pollutants which are there in the surface water. So that's why we see that in many of the wetlands, uh, there is a kind of a cleansing function that also enhances the quality of the groundwater supplies in that area. So whether it is about surface water or groundwater, in both the cases we see that they help in maintaining, or at least maintaining, or maybe even enhancing the water quality. Then after that, they help in the reduction of the coastal storm damage. Now, as we discussed that in many of the areas across the world, they would help you in reducing the effect of the storms because of the wetlands that are present in these areas. They also help in the flood control. So they help in, let's say, cyclone or storm control. Then they also help in flood control. They also help in flood control. Now, what we have seen is that in the wetlands, specifically across the rivers and the streams, they absorb energy and they store water during the storms. And this is something that will also reduce the downstream flood damage. And that's why the risk of the damage that can happen because of the floods can also be reduced because of the wetlands. So that's why they become very, very crucial, and they help in the maintaining of the flow of the rivers as well. Then after that, they help in controlling erosion of the soil also, because wetland vegetation can bind the soil on the stream banks, and hence they will help in the reduction of the soil erosion. So they help in reducing, they reduce soil erosion. They reduce soil, sorry, erosion. They help in reducing of the soil erosion as well. So that also becomes a major impact. Then they also help in maintaining of the wildlife habitat. We have seen that they provide habitats to a lot of amphibians, a lot of reptiles, a lot of mammals, and a lot of birds. And all these have very unique adaptation to these kind of wetlands. So that's why they help in maintaining, you can say, the biodiversity. They help in maintaining the biodiversity, because many of the amphibians, mammals, reptiles, and birds, they all will be able to uh, survive in these kind of areas, and that's why they improve the biodiversity of these areas. At the same time, they also play a very vital role in the migratory bird species as well. So for example, a lot of these cranes, for example, they in winter, we have seen that in some of the areas, some of the marshes in some countries, they would be flooded, and then we see that the breeding grounds will be made in these kind of wetlands for some of these crane species. So that's why they become very very important habitats for them. Then they also become a very important habitat for the fish also. So many different types of fish also, they would remain in these kind of habitats. So they help in maintaining them, their population as well. So overall, we see that there are a lot of these species that are residing in these kind of specific areas. So overall we see that the wetlands become very very crucial. They provide a lot of productivity. For example, they help in maintaining the ecosystem productivity as well. So some of the wetlands, they are said to be the most productive ecosystems on the earth. We have seen that a lot of different types of animals and plants, they would grow there, and they would help in maintaining of all these ecosystems. So that's why there are a lot of various areas, a lot of importance that they have. They become very important ecotone as well in these kind of systems, and that's why they would help in a lot of different manner. So uh, so we have to understand that there are so many ways in which wetlands can become important. Even when it comes to providing clean water, plentiful water supplies, they would be able to do that. So many of these areas, they also become important from that perspective. So that's why we have to understand the importance of the wetlands. So something like this, if you consider a question like this, that wetlands are vital for human survival and are amongst the world's most productive environments. They are cradles of biological diversity and provide water and productivity upon which countless species of plants and animals depend for survival, yet they continue to be among the most threatened ecosystems worldwide or globally. In the light of this statement, discuss the importance of wetlands in maintaining ecological balance and supporting human livelihood. So, all these points that we discussed, these are the points that can be mentioned in such a question. So, so that's why first you will start with what exactly do we mean by wetlands and their global significance, and then all the importance of wetlands, the challenges that we are facing with regards to with these wetlands, and the measures that are required for their sustainable management. So all these things can be mentioned all together, and then again in the conclusion talk about the importance, again reinforce their importance, and conclude the answer with regards to what can be done locally and globally with regards to conservation of the wetlands. Then India's oldest tigress dies. This was a news. This was also in the Down to Earth magazine. Now, the oldest tiger, the name of the tiger was Rajmata, and 19 years old she was, and she was in the Sariska Tiger Reserve in Rajasthan. Now, when it comes to the importance of and why are we talking about a death of a certain tigress, she was the oldest tigress and at the same time has been very very crucial in the context of Project Tiger. Now, as a part of Project Tiger, this Sariska Tiger Reserve was established, and this Sariska Tiger Reserve in 2004 had become very infamous, and it was said to be the only tiger reserve without a tiger. It was this was a name given to, infamously this was the name given to this tiger reserve, that it is India's only tiger reserve without a tiger, because of so many of poaching activities. A lot of poaching happened, and by 2004 there was not a single tiger left in this particular tiger reserve. And then repopulation of the tiger reserve started in 2004, and she was the second tigress to be added to this Sariska Tiger Reserve. And today, out of the 30 cubs that were born in the Sariska Tiger Reserve, 25 cubs were born from. She contributed to 25 of these cubs. So that's why for the repopulation that could happen in the Sariska Tiger Reserve, she played a very, very important role. And that's why it is very, very significant. It is like an end of an era, as some of the ecologists have said, that her death marks the end of a very important aspect of Project Tiger and the re-establishment of Project Tiger that was done back in 2000s. So that is why it becomes a very very important uh, news. So that's why, I mean, from a news like this, a mains question perhaps will not come, but a prelims based question can come with regards to the name, that the name was Rajmata and she was in Sariska Tiger Reserve, and what was her importance in this particular aspect. Then another news has been about a new species of damselfly that has been discovered. Now this new species that has been discovered, this has been named as cliffside bamboo tail. All right, cliffside bamboo tail is the name given, and now this has been discovered in the Ponmudi hills of Thirunanthapuram in Kerala, where we see that in it becomes very unique because it lays eggs in the moss beds in the seasonal rills that flow over the rock cliffs. And overall, when it comes to this, it is different from the other bamboo tail which is found here. That is the Myristica bamboo tail, and it lays eggs on the surface roots of the riparian trees. So that's why it is unique in its account. And for the first time, we have found another species that basically is from the same genus, because until now this Myristica bamboo tail was the only such species known, and this is for the first time a new species has been discovered of the same genus, and that is why it becomes unique in that sense. So that's why, just remember this. And right now what we know is that the existing one, that is the Myristica bamboo tail, is a near threatened and endemic to the Western Ghats. So just remember these small uh, data points with regards to your prelims examination. Another topic has been snow leopard survey. Now, this snow leopard survey was done for the first time in India, and it counted India's snow leopard number to be at 718. Now, this survey basically was, you can say, India's first ever survey of snow leopards, and this is where the estimation was done that there are 718 of them left in India. Now, overall, this makes up for almost, you can say, 10 to 15% of the global population of the snow leopards in the world. Overall, when it comes to the snow leopards, we know that snow leopards basically live in vast, remote areas of mountainous landscapes, and they are one of the most difficult predators to study because they are very difficult to find. It's not very easy to detect them, and because of the colors that they have, you you just go and google and how they are able to camouflage themselves in the mountain areas. You'll find that spotting them is very, very difficult. I'm not sure whether you've seen these pictures all over the internet or not, but snow leopard pictures are quite famous for that it's very, very difficult to find them, very, very, very difficult to spot them. Have you seen these kind of pictures, that where you'll find that the pictures basically are asking you to spot where the snow leopards are? So that's why. And so, okay, some of you have not seen it. If you've not seen it, just go and google and you'll find these kind of images where it's very difficult for them to be spotted. So that is basically what was done. Now what we did was that there was this survey that was conducted between 2019 to 2023, and this was set up this had set up almost, I think, 1971 camera traps all across the country, all the states where they are found, for starting from Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, and then Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh. So out of all these areas, almost 34% of these areas are under some kind of legal protection, some kind of forested protected areas, and the approximately 240 photographs were taken and estimations were done based on scientific findings. The method that was used as per the scientists was very similar to the method that we use for finding tigers, the estimation of the numbers of tigers. So that's why it becomes very important, because this is for the first time that a survey of this manner has been done in India. So when it comes to India, these are the states where all this survey was done, and these are the states where we find them. Apart from these areas, of course, all these areas nearby, they also have the species of snow leopard. So for example, China also has it, Nepal has it, Pakistan also has it. Then other countries, for example, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Nepal, all these areas, Afghanistan, all these countries also, they have uh, snow leopard. So approximately across 12 nations in Asia, they all have snow leopards, and approximately 10 to 15% of it, now we can say that with surety, that lies in India. So in 2017, it was considered as vulnerable as a part of the IUCN Red List. Uh, and that's why this is also an information that can be important for you from the perspective of the examination. So, overall, just remember some of these facts with regards to the snow leopards. Then another small news, the scientists have discovered a new kangaroo lizard species. Now, does it mean that it has a pouch? Unfortunately, it does not. It does not have a pouch, and although the name is uh, kangaroo lizard. Now, the name has been given as Agasthyamagama edge is the name given to this particular species that was discovered. So very unique discovery that was done, and in these kind of areas, the important fact about these kangaroo lizards is that these kangaroo lizards live in areas normally they are not the ones to climb. Generally, these lizards will be able to climb the trees and live in the trees, but these kangaroo lizards they cannot climb, and that's why they would rather live in the dried leaves, as you can see in the picture also that they live in the dried leaves, and hence they would be able to camouflage well with regards to these kinds of dried leaves, and they would move very quickly up across the leaves, and they would be able to survive in these kind of areas. So that's why just remember that these are mostly terrestrial in nature, and they are found in areas where you have very dense leaf litter cover, and hence they would be able to feed on the small insects in these kind of areas, and they would just run and hide if required in these kind of areas. Then one more news has been about the Himalayan wolf, and the Himalayan wolf now has been listed as vulnerable in the IUCN Red List. Now, the Himalayan wolf is found in the Himalayan region, and especially in India, Nepal, the Tibetan Plateau. So these are the areas where it is found. Now, overall, the report that was published by IUCN, it noted that the numbers lie somewhere between 2200 to 3700. So 2275 to 3792 individuals are left, and that's why they have been listed as vulnerable species. Now, overall, it has been said that because of various different anthropogenic factors, their numbers have been on a decline. So until now, when, for example, in case of India, the estimates have been that in India there are approximately, you can say approximately 230 to 380 of these uh, Himalayan wolves, which have been found in India and distributed approximately in the upper Himalayan areas. Areas like Lahaul Spiti in the Himachal, or in Ladakh, or some of the small areas in Sikkim and Uttarakhand, and in possibly also in Arunachal Pradesh. So these are the areas where they would be found. So that is what basically has been done, and because of the lower numbers, now they have been given the vulnerable status in IUCN Red List. So this is basically the news that was published with regards to the Himalayan wolves. So just have to understand that why it has been now counted as vulnerable, because this is where we want to also look at various conservation efforts that needs to be made in this regard. Then two new mammal species have been identified in Kaziranga. Now, the fifth water bird census that was happening in the month of January, this is where it across all the water bodies that we have in the Kaziranga, there was a survey that was done, and in this survey, they actually found two new species of mammals in the Kaziranga forest or Kaziranga Tiger Reserve. Now, overall, when it comes to this tiger reserve, becomes very very crucial, and especially you might know that it is known for one very particular species, very important species. What is that species that it is known for? There's one species that it is very well known for, the Kaziranga Tiger Reserve. Yes, one horned rhino. Correct. So it is largely known for one horned rhino. But apart from the one horned rhino, Indian elephants are also found there. Bengal tigers are also found there. Wild water buffaloes are also found there. And then swamp deers are also found. So we say that there are big five mammals that are found in this area. I'll write it down. So what are these five species? One is for the one horned rhino, right? For the one horned rhino, then apart from, so one horned rhino, then also the Bengal tiger, then elephants, then wild water buffalo, and then swamp deers. So we say that these are the five uh, large. These are the five types of big mammals that are found here. And then apart from that, there are other mammals are also which are found in this particular area. Now, what they have done is that they have found these two new species of mammals in this particular area. So one is small clawed otter, and the other one is binturong. Now, these two have been found. Now, when it comes to these two specifically, some of the data with regards to these two can also be important. So, for example, let's say when it comes to the binturong, they're also called as bear cat. They are they're also named as bear cat, or in Assamese they are also called as young. So young is the name given in Assamese. Now they are nocturnal animals and they live in the trees, as you can see in this picture that they live in the trees, and they now have been registered as a part of Schedule 1 under the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. All right. So as a part of the Wildlife Protection Act in Schedule 1, they are now have been listed there. Now, at the same time, when it comes to the second discovery has been about the small clawed otter, the very cute little small clawed otter. And this is, just understand this, that this is Asia's, uh, this is the smallest known otter that we find in Asia. So that's why this can be a prelims based uh, data for you. So if you look at this uh, question, for example, consider the following statements. Small clawed otter is also known as the Asian small clawed otter. This is correct. And the Binturong carries the title of the largest civet in India. This is also correct. That this is the largest civet in India. So that's why these are some of the data points that you can say are important, and hence all both the statements given here are correct. And then lastly, coming to Hanuman plover, a new name that has been given to a new bird that was found in Sri Lanka. Now, this is a bird that was initially merged with another plover species called as the Kentish plover. Now it has been reclassified as different species. All right, so first they were both considered to be the same, but then some DNA sequencing was done, and with this DNA sequencing scientists have been able to confirm that there are subtle differences between these two, and hence they should not be considered as one. So one is called as the Kentish plover, and the other one now has been named after Lord Hanuman and has been given the name of Hanuman plover. So that's why, because of the name that has been given, that's why you should remember the name. So this is a resident of India and Sri Lanka and has been reinstated as a species 86 years after being relegated as to a subspecies, and so named after Lord Hanuman. And this is a small whitish bird, very small, of the size of robin. So initially it was merged with Kentish plover, and in the 1930s, and now it has again been reclassified because of the DNA sequencing that was done recently. So that is why the name basically has been given, because it is found in those areas between India and Sri Lanka where, uh, as a part of Ramayana, we say that these are the areas which were crossed by Lord Hanuman while he advented to Lanka. So that's why the name has been given by Sri Lankan scientists as Hanuman plover. So, and yes, Sri Lankan scientists, not the Indian scientists. So this is the name, and that's why, because of the uniqueness of the name, just remember this name. All right. So, this brings us to the end of the discussion for today's lecture. I hope that this discussion helped you. There are a lot of topics that we have discussed as a part of today's lecture, and many of these, as we discussed, that some of these can be important from mains perspective. The first 3 4 topics that we discussed, where I took a lot of time, those are the areas which are important also from mains perspective. And the second part of the discussion, where we discussed some of the newer found species or some of the research done on some of the species, that is more important, I would say, from prelims perspective rather than from mains perspective. All right. So this, so if you, so anyway, I think if you have any further questions, I hope that this session was useful for you. But if you have any further questions, you can always write to me at rashesh.kumar at byju's.com. And if you have any questions with regards to everything that we discussed, you can always get back to me. So just one thing, just go back and revise everything, that because there are a lot of areas to be covered and there are a lot of various aspects to be covered. A lot of news articles that we have covered have been in the news constantly. For example, the Forest Amendment Act, since October it has been in the news. So that's why topics like these can specifically become important for your examination, whether prelims or mains. So that's why please go back and revise, and if you have any doubts, you can always come back to us. So with that, let me take your leave. Thank you very much. Good night.